David, I think we met you and you did one of our courses maybe 5
Yes.
years ago, 4 years ago.
God, was it that long ago?
Yeah, and I've been really impressed with your career development and your progress. It's been quite something to watch. Almost, sort of getting to that point where you operating as a thought leader, and people are certainly responding to your post on your LinkedIn post. That was a great one on data quality. And so, yeah, it's lovely to see the people growing and developing. And David, I really wish you all the best for where you're going. I know it was quite an interesting one when David moved from New York to Mexico. It was quite an interesting one. And I suppose remote working is really helpful, and you can choose where you work. And so, yeah, let's hand over to David. And the thing that I was really excited about is all of us look at CDMP certification. Now, I also work on the ISO community, and we there's lots of certification on ISO as well. But and I'd love to really just get people's feedback in terms of how they perceive ISO, what they think of the certification, and how we can improve on that thing. Thanks, David. All yours.
Okay, there's a little bit of noise in the background. Maybe someone should
I've just
go on
tried
mute.
switching them
All
off.
right, thanks.
I'm going through them now to switch everybody off.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Thanks. All right, I'll make sure this is full screen. All right, so that's me on the left there, David Finlay. I had a little bit more hair there. I just got my hair cut last week, although I don't normally have that much hair. My company is Data Driven Associates, and they're my contact details here at the bottom. But you will get, as far as I know, Howard, you'll get a copy of the PDF of these slides afterwards as well.
Yeah, we will do that.
Okay. Yep. Okay, next slide. All right, so today we're going to talk about ISO 8000, which is the ISO series of standards for data quality. And then there's a certification called the Master Data Quality Manager Certification. In fact, we'll spend more time on the latter, especially since I now know we only have up to 55 minutes, but I think that's what the most interesting part is anyway. So there's three parts to it. The first part is a high-level summary of, why we came to talk about this topic today. You talked about a LinkedIn post, which I want to talk about for a minute. Then I have a set of 10 questions that I've gathered about this certification. And hopefully those 10 questions will help your audience to know whether this certification is for them or not. And actually, if there are other questions, I'd like to gather those, because I would probably put them into a future version and update of the slides if there are other questions that I can add in. Sure. And then the third part, which is hopefully we'll have time for, I wouldn't say we're going to have time for all of this, but I'd be happy if we get all of part 2 done, right? And the third part is there are quite a number of these ISO 8000 standards, and I picked a selection of them to go into in a little bit more detail. So 3 or 4 slides on each one to give people a bit of a flavor of what they're getting themselves in for if they go and decide to buy the standards and not just do the certification. Okay, so that's the kind of the themes for today. Okay, I just talked about that. All right, so part 1. So one thing, the MDQM certification process and the training, I'm not involved in that. I have no stake in the company who produces it, and I'm not a salesperson for them. So just wanted to highlight that here. I am very enthusiastic about data quality, which I would say probably most of the people, if not all on the call, are. So I do hope you get some value from the presentation. Okay, next one. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm actually not a data guy initially. I was a supply chain guy, probably still am, always a supply chain guy. I worked in jobs like supply chain demand planning. That was in Ireland. Then in Germany, I worked in warehousing and distribution. And through those jobs, I actually got a feel for why data is so important, particularly why master data is so important in ERP systems, like SAP, for example. So in other words, I found myself in situations where I wasn't able to forecast products. I found myself in situations where I wasn't able to receive products in the warehouse because they had the wrong weights and dimensions or temperature requirements. And a lot of it was down to missing master data or incorrect master data. So as things happened that way, I got the chance that my boss told me, okay, well, you're always talking about why this stuff is always wrong. So now you're going to get a chance to fix some of it. So it'll be your fault then, right?
Yeah.
So then I did some SAP implementations, and I moved to the US, and I got the lofty title of data governor for material master data. So basically, it was setting up data governance and master data management processes to improve the data quality. And this was in Siemens Healthineers, which is a medical device company. So I've always worked in medical devices or in pharma in the last few years. I'm a strong affinity to those industries. And down towards the bottom, I have an MBA, so that's my business background, and I have a CDMP. But I'm now actually studying at the University of Little Rock, Arkansas Little Rock. They have a PhD program in information quality. I started that in November of 2022. Yes, 2022. I hope to have all my academic studies done by the end of next year, and then I'll go into my dissertation. I haven't got my dissertation topic fully settled on yet. I'm thinking of doing it in the area of obsolescence, but I'm not sure yet. Then down the bottom, as you can hear from my accent, despite living in the US for more than 10 years, I still have an Irish accent. My wife is Mexican, and my kids have 3 passports: Irish, Mexican, and American. And I speak German as well. So that's my personal background. My company is Data Driven Associates LLC. It sounds like it's plural because it's associates. It's usually just me, but it's not always. It depends on the project. So sometimes I go into projects and quote for them together with other companies, or sometimes I get asked to go on to programs, multi-year programs with other companies, and that's why I like to say associates, because you're not on your own, right? You're usually one or the other. So my motto is getting projects done with data. And I started this actually during COVID. The start of COVID, when a lot of people, I think, reestablished or reinvigorated their careers in different directions. I felt that I'd worked at nearly 20 years in industry, and I had sufficient knowledge to try and make a go of it in consulting. So supply chain management, master data are the things that do, the industries, and then you see a selection of some of the clients down the bottom that I've had over the last couple of years. Okay, so that's enough about me. Now we're going to talk about, so why am I here today? Howard, you mentioned it. I wrote I think it was early in the second week of January, I wrote a post on LinkedIn about this topic. So about the fact that I'm after doing this certification, and a few bullet points about it. I was shocked to get nearly 12,000 views of that. I've never had more than 7,000 views of any post I've ever did on LinkedIn. And quite often it's usually in the 2,000 or 3,000 rather. And I was shocked by that because it is a rather dry topic. I wouldn't have thought there was a massive interest in ISO standards.
That's right.
But so that's why I'm saying this. I was actually encouraged to find that there are at least some folk that seem to be interested in ISO standards, and maybe were not aware. I got quite a few messages that they actually weren't aware there was one for data quality. And a lot of people certainly weren't aware there was a free training available about the topic and a certificate. So that's why, Howard, actually, you saw my post. And as you've mentioned before, I have a lot of respect for the work you guys do. I think you have a very infectious enthusiasm for data, which shows in your webinars. And I was glad to take one of your trainings before. But you said, well, why don't you come along and talk about this as one of our future webinars? So here I am. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to give a slight executive summary of the ISO 8000 series. So it's all about data quality. There are several primary topics in it. So it does talk about data governance, data quality management, data assessment. When they talk about data assessment, they actually talk about doing maturity models. So you may be aware, maybe you've done webinars before on different types of maturity models. There are a number of them out there, like CMMI, Gartner, but it talks about how you do one as well, which is quite good. They talk about master data, reference data, and then weirdly enough, maybe not weirdly, but they talk about industrial data. And What I found out about that is the reason why they do this, these standards were actually written by people that worked in industrial data. It's just that they can be very applied to other types of data. So that's where that kind of comes from. Now, down the bottom, I specifically mentioned ISO 9000. ISO 9000, hopefully some of your listeners will be familiar with that. That it's probably the most familiar ISO standards available by quality management principles. Usually, if you're a supplier to a very large company, they'll require you to be ISO 9000 certified. So it's about quality management systems and having business processes in place. But it doesn't specifically talk about data quality specifically. So ISO 8000 addresses that. They aren't completely linked together. There is work being done still, I believe, in the Standards Authority to try and link them further, but they are very complementary. So that's what I talk about that. So we're going to look at some of these standards. After we talk about the certification, we're going to have a look at some of these standards. At least we can try and get through some of them, right? So there are 23 parts, they call it, in the so individual parts that you can purchase from ISO. And there's a list of them here. There's the numbers and then the topic here. I picked some on the left that we could try and get through talking about today, but actually, I was actually kind of joking to myself last night, but actually, maybe we should have another webinar specifically dedicated to go through all of these standards or groups of them, maybe, right? But that's for another day, right? It's 500 pages, so it's tough reading if you're going to get them all. But that's why it's probably a good idea to do this training first to decide whether you want to go there. So why use the ISO 8000 series? Well, the typical talk about unlocking potential for data. Evidence base is very important, right? So when you have ISO standards, you can't just say I tick the boxes, right? You literally, if you want to get audited, especially, you need to prove that you have the data artifacts, that you have policies in place, that you have obvious process loops in place for receiving data quality issues and remedying them. That's one of the biggest points I think about it. The other point as well, it's focused a lot on interconnection between business partners. So how maybe if you're a manufacturer, how you interact with your sales organization or your customers and how you get data across without dirtying it across systems and across companies. So it talks a lot about that. And universally applicable means that in theory, any organization of any size can benefit by high quality data and could benefit by the ISO processes. All right, so right into it then, part two with what people wanted to hear from today, which is, go ahead.
Sorry. Just a quick question. I mean, so it does focus a lot on master data quality, and we see certain of the parts are specifically for master data.
Yeah.
What is it in terms of transaction data? Does it deal with it, or is that found somewhere else?
Trying to think. No, it's mostly about. I think that might be in the 2000 set. I think it's
Okay.
you can see here, it's mostly about identifiers and the dimensions of data quality, right? As you can see here. But that's a good. I'll take that down and actually have a look at that and see what I actually do. Okay. All right. So part two is about the certification itself. So the body that creates the certification is called ECCMA. There's the long form there. There's their website. There's their LinkedIn group, and then their email. If you want to talk to them, and then this is the qualification, the badge you can get, the Master Data Quality Manager. Second. All right, so these are the 10 questions I prepared. I'm not going to read these. I'm just going to give people maybe a few 30 seconds just to read through them, just so they get familiar with the questions we're going to talk about. So I wanted to give people the ability to try and work out by using examples if it would be the type of thing that would be of interest to them. Give an idea of the difficulty or not. Give some sample questions so they get an idea of what gets asked. Go into some detail about who is actually using this or claims to have it. And then how you get started. So that's pretty much all the questions are based upon. So I'll get right into the first question, Howard, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the first one, so what does it cover? So it covers the 23 parts of the ISO 8000, which we just flashed up on the screen. And it also covers some aspects of a different ISO standard called 22745, which is more into master data and data dictionaries and that kind of thing. I won't talk too much about that today, but it definitely covers aspects of that as well. Right, so here we go. So you can spend $2,000, which I did. I bought all of these standards, so you didn't have to. Right. I bought them all and read them all eventually, but I probably would have done it the other way around if I had hindsight. I would have done this course first before buying the standards rather than buying the standards and then doing the course, right? Because you may decide that it's sufficient to do the course, or you may decide that what you've seen in the course might say, okay, I'm particularly interested in, if I just go back to the list for a second, you might say, oh, I don't care so much for, master data syntactic, semantic, but gosh, I do care about data quality assessment. And then it could, once you've done the course, you may get a better idea which ones you want to look into in more detail. So that was one of my first learnings. Like I said, or you can do this free course and make up your mind. But you can buy the standards here at this link, right? And in fact, not just that link. I think there's individual country body links. Howard, maybe you know more about that. That may sell the standards at different prices. I'm not too sure, but I think there's something like that, right? Depending on the country, and they may be priced differently. All right. So why did I take this course? Well, I've been doing data quality projects. I've read quite a few books by other experts or people that consult on this topic. But then I was quite interested in seeing that they all have their own way of doing it, but I hadn't seen one in a standard form that you can like ISO standards. So that's what kind of draw me to it, that it was kind of standardized and it was more formal, right? The other part was that because I work a lot with regulated companies. They're big into ISO 9000, and so they were used to seeing the types of terminology you'd see in these documents. Also, there was less struggle, I think, with this familiarity. There's less struggle when you talk to quality departments or documentation departments if you try to implement something like ISO 8000, because they'll say, oh yeah, we already kind of know that stuff, so you're building on it rather than coming in on something completely new that you've created yourself, right? So hopefully you might get some value out of doing that. And then the last part, I actually promised a professor at my university that I would take the course. I was doing the data quality module with him, and he was telling us about this course, and I said I'd take it. So whether it's right for you or not, I'm not a technical person, right? So that was one of the concerns I got, that I thought this would be way too dry and too technical, and I wouldn't understand it. But as you can see, I'm a supply chain guy at heart, but I just happen to creep myself into data quality, and now I'm doing a PhD in it. It does go into some technical subjects, but a lot of it is actually based on, I would say, human-based topics, like, for example, doing the data quality assessment, which goes into organization, awareness and readiness, and all those kind of psychological topics, and not only technical topics. It is a bit of a challenge, right? I wouldn't say it's that easy, but it's the fact, I think, that you bothered to join this webinar. I reckon that probably qualifies you enough to do the course, right? The fact that you showed up here for this, that's my opinion anyway. So time commitment. I did it the week after Christmas when I had some downtime between work, and I think you could actually, if you really went hell for leather, you could do it during a weekend, right? If you weren't doing much else, or you could spread it over a week or two, maybe a couple hours a night over a week or two. That's what I think would be reasonable. And it's actually important because it's a self-paced course, right? If you take the online version, but they only give you 30 days to do it, right? So when you start it, the clock ticks, and if you don't finish it in the 30 days, you have to start over again from scratch. So just bear that in mind. If you're thinking about doing it, then wait until the time that you think you're going to have this. I know life creeps in, and things crop up all the time. But try and do it in a time where you think you can get it done in 30 days. Okay, so how difficult it is. This, maybe you won't like this, however, but it says it's not tricky, unlike some of the CDMP exam questions, which I found to be, some of them weren't, in my opinion, part of the stuff that was written in the book. Whereas
yeah,
the question,
master level, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough, right? But whereas in this exam you won't find that. Every question is very linked to what's in the content, right? So if you know
okay.
so if you know the content, you're going to do well. I get 93%. This is the breakdown on the right hand side. So there's no end exam. So you don't look at all this stuff and at the end of it you either pass or fail. You actually have to keep passing throughout the sequence of sections, right? So there's 8 sections, or quizzes as they call them. Now you can see some of them more heavily weighted than others, right? There's different marks in each section, right? You have to get 80% pass, but you can repeat. So if you got 77, you can immediately afterwards repeat it until you get the 80% for that quiz. So think of it like that as well. All right, so that's the difficulty level, and a bit more about the structure. Okay, what's next? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take 4 questions that are actually part of the quizzes. Right? Now I want to be a little bit careful with this, right? Because I don't want to violate any terms and conditions of the ECCMA by providing answers directly to these questions. But I did think it was important that if some of you are thinking about doing this, that maybe you'd like to see what type. Same way with CDMP, right? No one I know goes into the CDMP without having looked at test questions, right? Or to practice, right? So it's the same thing here, right? So I wanted to be a little bit interactive here for a second, if you'd like to humor me and ask the question. So the main reason to store data as ISO 8000 compliant data is, there's three options. One is to allow data privacy, to allow compliance with ERP systems, or 3, to ensure data is stored independently of any application. Now, only one of those is correct. Would anybody like to venture an idea as to which of those answers is correct?
They answering in the chat. So Evans has come back with a 3, and Eprit is also 3.
Okay, well, all I can say is there you go. You would do well in the exam. right. If you selected that answer. Here's another one. ISO 8110 compliant data must be accurate or must meet requirements. Sounds like a weird thing that it should be either one or the other, but there is, per the standards, only one of those is correct. What do you think?
We've got a few people saying it's number 2.
Yeah, any ones?
No ones.
Okay, well then you probably should start doing this content, because you would be correct with number 2. and I think that's probably not surprised if someone has familiar with other ISO standards, right? That's probably not too surprised, right, Herb? Because ISO standards are all about getting requirements, and that the data quality isn't the eyes of the beholder in certain ways, right? It can be accurate or correct in one sense, but not the other. It really depends on what you're using it for. So
Yeah,
that's
the
why
fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Fit for purpose. Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna do 2 more. Sorry, 2 more. Okay. In order to claim compliance to ISO 8000, the standard requires that you gain external certification. True or false?
True from Vilash. Another true.
All right, so
Mostly true.
I will surprise you that the answer is false. So in other words, you can self-certify and claim compliance. Now,
Yeah.
maybe it's the word claim compliance is the word that maybe threw people off. If you're to be audit, maybe if it said it in order to meet an audit, maybe something would be different. Because you're claiming compliance, you can do it yourself, so you can read all the standards and you can implement per the standards, so long as you're able to provide evidence to yourself and your management that you're actually meeting the standards. That's not to say that you should not or cannot get external certification. In fact, the ECCMA are one of those bodies who could certify you, right, at a cost, obviously. But you don't have to, right? So you could start off by self-certifying and then maybe go the route of external certification afterwards.
So David, just a question there. Does that certification mean that your organization or your quality program is certified, or does it mean that you as an individual are certified?
No, it means that your organization is claiming the certification to be compliant with the standards, not that you personally have this certificate. Yeah.
Okay.
I was a bit surprised by that, but that's yeah. Okay, last one. Data used in organization has to be validated by the person who manages the data, person who created the data, or the person who used the data. I don't know why there's a gap between 2 and 3, but anyway, okay. What do you think?
I'm from Vilash.
I heard a 1.
Yes, there's 1. Oh, someone's got a 1, 2, 3.
So select 1.
Yeah.
When I say select 1, it doesn't mean select the number 1. It says select 1 of the 3.
And then someone else, Emma has said 1. So we have 2 on 1, and Jorge is 2.
Okay, I'd like to hear, is there anybody that'd be willing to say why they think it's other than 1? Why they think it was 2 or 3? Would there be any, maybe if someone in the audience is willing to speak up for a moment, and that'd be great. If not, Howard, maybe you could have a shot at it.
Yeah. Jorge, the reason why you went 2 or 3, Jorge, is can you explain your reason?
Don't want to put anybody in the spot.
No, I don't mind doing that. We do have somebody else that
I'd love to hear from someone willing to say why they thought it was 2 or 3.
Okay, so Danitzel said that because we need to have trust in the results.
Is that the reason why he's saying it's 2 or 3?
3.
Okay. All right. So
and Alubashaya said 3 because the user is eventually able to confirm it's fit for purpose.
Yeah, and I like that answer. So that's actually, when I was going through this, I think I didn't get this correct, because I did 3. I picked 3, but in fact, according to the ISO standard, it's 2. So Jorge was correct. It's interesting. If you wanted to, if you're taking a hardline approach, I think 2 would be the answer, because you're trying to get people to be invested in creating the data correctly in the first place, right? In other words, this notion of first time correct and not giving bad data onto others, right?
Right.
I think that's where they're coming from. Easier said than done. Right? Whereas a lot of people would say, well, actually, no, I know it's a responsibility of people to create good data, but it's also a responsibility of people receiving data to kind of it's like the canary in the coal mine, the smell test, to see does it make sense, and not just blindly receive it. But in the ideal world, I guess 2 would be the answer, right?
But is that almost where we have consumers who use the data? Then the person who creates the data would would have to understand all of the decisions they
Yes,
make.
yes, 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 yes. So, and they go into that in the standards. They talk about the fact that this can only work when there's a kind of a what do you call it? Two, maybe it's a loop, maybe it's two arrows, where people understand, the what their work means for others. This kind of
Yeah,
customer supplier relationship.
right.
And when that works, that's really good, right? But it's very hard to get people to get into that sometimes, especially in larger organizations. But
And
yes, you're right. That's where it comes from.
yeah, and that's what Tom Redmond spoke about in his latest book. He
Oh yeah.
said you'd get all these parties in the room, and then each party would say, well, when I get the data from you, then these are the problems I have. And so they went around the table explaining uh, what challenges they have with the people who created the data, and those people can then address that situation. And so he uses that as a technique for ensuring that the providers or the producers get good quality data.
Is this his notion of this was a Friday afternoon? He
No,
has this thing.
it's part
No,
of
something
that.
else.
It's part of that toolkit. The Friday afternoon is
Yeah.
just looking at the top 200 records
Okay.
and doing a yes no. But he then also has, it's all about the people. So he brings people together
Okay.
to
That's his
try
new
to
book,
see
right?
the impact of them handing bad data down to their the next partner, the person who's sitting and receiving the data.
Okay, that's good. That's a book I actually need to put on my list. I've got a couple of his books already, but the new one I've heard some good things about it. So yeah, as you can see, so it generates they're the four questions I was going to go into, because I don't think it's fair to the ECC made that I'd start going into more of the 60 questions. But you can see that already most of the people were getting 3 out of the 4 questions correctly, which hopefully gives you a little bit of enthusiasm for actually
Hmm.
going into doing it, right? So it's not that difficult, right? I mean, that last one was a bit tricky, I would say, but other than that, it wasn't too bad, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. So, who has the MDQM credential? Well, I have it since January. That's what the certificate looks like on the left. But there's a page on the ECCMA website. I don't know how often they update it, but they update it from time to time. And in January, I looked at it and they said that 920 people, 21 people had it, right? And about 30% of them were in the US. But actually, the most amount outside the US were India, UK, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and then below that, there was single-digit numbers in well over 50 countries, right? A couple of people here and there. But those are the countries where most of the participants who have this certification. Okay, that is actually a picture of what you get at the end. I think they give you a badge to put in your LinkedIn as well. Okay, so maybe you touched upon this, Howard. MDQM it's definitely not recognized in the same way as CDMP, right? So you won't hear about it as much. In fact, I hadn't heard about it at all before looking into this, right? But I do think that it is specialized in data quality, and I think it could be an interesting talking point in job interviews for some people. And certainly, I've already had some interest, like I mentioned, because of the ISO 9000 interaction with some of the customers I have, that they say, oh, that's interesting. We should do a bit of that as well, right? So I think, although it's certainly not, it's not the same kind of requirement. I haven't seen it in job requirements, right? I have seen CDMP or
Yeah.
others in job
Yeah.
requirements. Okay.
Certainly.
Then again, it is free. So what's the cost, right? So there are 2 options you can do to do this training and the certification. The first one is actually completely free. And you get a PDF certificate at the end of it. Now, they will, if you want, for a charge, they'll mail you a paper copy. I don't know why you would need that, but that's the only charge for it. But they do have a second option, right? They'll offer to set up an online session with a bunch of people if you want to pay them, or they'll even go out to your company. I think usually if you're UK or US based, I think they can go out to your company and do an on-site as well, if that's something that you're interested in. But you don't have to, right? As I said, the self-study version is free. And just a disclaimer, then again, I'm not,
Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
sorry. There is one question for Olamise. They're asking, please confirm that the certification is for the individual and not the organization. That's sort of the question that we were looking
There
at
you are.
earlier on.
There's my name. There, if you look at it here, it says my name on it. Doesn't say my company on it. It says my name.
Yeah. But as an organization, is it also possible that you can certify your program, that someone comes in and does,
yes,
similar to the ISO 9000, where you can get that certification as a company?
Yes, that's separate. Yes, so this is definitely not this thing. So this is just certifying that you're aware of the ISO standards and have the tools to apply them, but it isn't certifying that you're doing things according to IS 8000. And actually, that's something I wanted to briefly talk about. Maybe I'll talk about it quickly first. This badge here, right? Hello, I'm the expert. I want people to remember, and you said this as well on occasion, Howard, certificates are great, but only practice makes the expert, right?
Yeah.
So having the certificate, you can't start claiming that I'm the expert now in ISO 8000.
Yeah.
Unless you got some projects under your belt and maybe actually got externally certified potentially, right, by your company, then come back to me and say you're the expert. Before that, don't. I don't claim to be the
It
expert.
really certifies your knowledge, but not your competency.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, CDMP is similar, right? In that way.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly the same.
Yeah. All right. So where do you do this, right? There's this. I think at the beginning I did show the links to the general website you see, but this is the link specifically to the form for sign up. They'll ask you for email, name. I don't think they ask you for any other personal identifying information. And then they come back to you. I'm not too sure if it's instant. I can't remember exactly. I think I got it the next day or a day after. They came back with a username, password, and something they call an enrollment key. And this enrollment key, I think, is what you have to reapply for if you don't get it done in 30 days. So if you complete all the quizzes with at least 80%, you'll get a certificate. Now they have this kind of progress bar as you're going along, so you can see how you're doing. And something I found out at the end, I was expecting, like with some other courses, that when the second you're finished, right, you can press a button and get your certificate. That's not how this works, and they may change it in the future. But what happened with me was that I finished it on a Wednesday and I didn't get the certificate till the Monday afterwards. No big deal. I mean, it wasn't in a major hurry. But it seems to be something like a manual process where they review something and then they send you a certificate by email. So don't be worried if you're not getting it. Don't pester them by email if you're not getting it immediately. I would give them a couple of days just to get back to you. And like we already mentioned this. Then I have a couple of do's and don'ts, right, for my last question, right? Not really, I guess it's not really a question. This is more advice, right? So I use OneNote extensively at work and at study, right? And you don't have to, but especially since you actually lose access to the content after 30 days. So unless you sign up again, you won't have access to the content again, even for your own reference later. So I would take screenshots of important pieces of information that you may want to remember to help you study or even reference afterwards. Do download and study the summary PDFs. They do give you, like each section, not nearly all sections, not every section, most sections, they give you a PDF with some bullet points and things to remember. But so you should look at those, but that won't be sufficient. So if you just go in and say, I'm gonna flick through the training really quick, as I've seen some people do, right? And not actually listen to it, right? Or look at it, and then you won't pass easily. Just looking at the PDFs, right? You do have to go through the training, I would say. I would say afterwards, do consider purchasing some of the ISO standards, but do the training first. Don't spend the $2,000 first, like I do. Spend it afterwards. And it's not $2,000 for each one, right? They range in price. They're anything from 30 euros to 90 euros, depending on, or Swiss francs, depending on what it is.
Yeah.
And again, it might be different in your country, right? And do let me know if you're interested in learning more about this topic in our future webinars. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I usually accept most requests if you're interested. And then a few don'ts, kind of the opposite of what I just said. So don't purchase any of the ISO standards merely to study for the MDQM. You don't need them, right? You can easily pass this exam just by looking at the content that they give you in the training. So don't feel pressured to buy the standards first. Also, just a little caveat, because I have had someone already come to me and ask me this. I had to unfortunately decline. Don't ask me or anybody else to provide you free PDF copies of any of the standards. These are proprietary standards of ISO, and Howard, right? And you shouldn't be distributing them online. It's as illegal as distributing software online. So don't do that, please. Get your company to pay for them. That'd be the ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was actually the bulk of the presentation, Howard. So there are 25 slides left, but they're all about going into particular standards and having a quick look. So how are we for time, and how many do you,
We got 10 minutes. We got 10 minutes left. So let's go through some of them and just give us an idea of what it looks like.
Okay, all right. Do you say 10 minutes before questions or 10 minutes including questions?
10 minutes, and then we can drift after. It depends on you.
Okay. All right. No, I have some time. Yeah, I can stay on for a bit out. All right. So let's get a couple of these done then, right? So as I mentioned, there are over 20 standards in the series, and I picked a few out here. So I'm going to go into the first one, 8001 overview. So typically with the ISO standards is the first one in the list is the one that it's almost like a table of contents. It says, okay, these are all the standards in this series, and it gives a kind of summary, like a few paragraphs on each of them, right? That's its purpose. So it goes into, why data quality is crucial for efficiency, digital drives performance and operations, high quality data is essential. It actually, I was surprised, it actually talks briefly about, that's not only about having data quality for human decision making, but now also for automation, including AI, right? So, and I think that's a big topic at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Where, the old GIGO or BS in, BS out topic is coming back yet again in spades, right? Where so it goes into the so it, like I said, the purpose is the overview of the standards. Talks about principles. It talks about the fact that we'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. It talks about the fact that the second standard is actually a vocabulary, or almost like a dictionary. We'll look at that in a second. The structure. So again, it talks about data governance, data quality management. And in data quality management, it talks about, you may be familiar with a PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act.
Yeah.
So it actually goes into that. It uses that as a tool. I mean, assessment, it talks about, maturity models, where you have maybe 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 different maturity levels that your organization may strive for or want to go for. And it talks about how to get evidence to say whether you're doing that. And then this industrial data topic, which I don't really know an awful lot about, but again, it was the impetus for creating the standards in the first place. Okay, so ISO 8000, the second one, so this is about the data, I would call it almost like a data dictionary. So there's actually, it defines 150 terms in this document, right? And it groups them into these 16 categories. Right? I won't read them all, but you can see them there. And the reason why they're doing this is this is typical ISO as well. They want people to be able to use terms and understand them across organizations in the same way. So, it's a bit like if some companies they decide to speak English, even if they're in different countries, they want to keep a common language. Not always English, but typically is, right? It's the same way here. They define terms to try and have a common lexicon, if you want. I'm going to look at one of the terms that this is actually the wording of one of the terms. So it talks about data specification, set of requirements, and then it kind of stresses that when you're collaborating with suppliers, this customer-supplier relationship, right? That you're creating data that your customer needs, so it should conform to what they need, so that they can use it. And this idea of all stakeholders understanding why they're doing it. And actually, to be certified to ISO 8000, you actually have to write specific policy statements to say that the intended uses and purposes of the data that you're creating, right? So to make it so it's not unclear, unambiguous to the people that are receiving the data what it is, you have to provide those types of statements. as part of that. So anyway, that's one of the definitions, but you'll find 150 more of these in that part 2. It also goes into what's commonly referred to in other models, the DQ dimensions, right? Yeah, I think there's some people have up to 15 or 16 of these, but they focus on the traditional ones of accuracy, completeness, consistency, and timeliness. I think I mentioned that already. They talk about the PDCA process. They also talk about data quality management being an ongoing process. So they don't want people to call it a project. And again, Kerry, maybe you talked about that in some of your webinars as well. The idea to get people to think that data quality is it's not like a puppy you get for Christmas and then return them when the kids don't want it anymore. It's you're in for the long term, right?
Yeah, it's a capability.
Capability, a good point. All right, that is a team effort. Now I find these strange terms where they use the words, but in their roles, they talk about managers, administrators, and technicians. I thought those are quite old terms for the type of roles that you'd have in data quality. I haven't seen that type of wording in job descriptions in the last while, right? It's more, but anyway, it kind of defines. You could say, okay, I'll put a different label on that job. You could call it anything you want at the end. Remember, I was mentioning at the start, they call me a data governor at one point, right? So, but it does talk about the types of things these people have to do. And I guess at the end of the day, as long as you're covering the topics in those roles, what's important, rather than what you're actually being called. Maybe this might be the last one, Howard, we go into. So ISO 8008, concepts of measurement reporting and prerequisites. It's talking about fit for purpose, this notion of fit for purpose, but it also talks about the fact that, and I was guilty of this myself actually earlier on in my career, where I was very nitpicky about having data perfect until I realized that depending on what the purpose is of the data, maybe you can get away with it being 98% correct.
Yeah.
Or 99.5. Okay, not so much in pharma and medical devices, I have to tell you. They kind of like it higher than that. But there are diminishing returns, right? And in how much you put effort into it, unless you've got a lot of money and resources.
Yeah.
If you've got tight money and resources, this idea of key or critical data entities or terms or to look after those first to get the best bang for buck, I would say. So it does talk about that. And then it goes into a few words that at first they sound a little bit daunting, but syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic. So that's where it kind of gets a little bit technical English terms, I would say. But it also talks about the scales. So remember I was talking about the maturity levels. It does talk about what is considered a 1 basis or what is considered a 5 innovating level. So it goes into that. I think that's where I wanted to stop today, Howard. I mean, there are a few more. There's data governance policy as well. And I'd like maybe if there is interest and in future webinars, maybe we could go specifically into the other standards.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. Okay, I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Well, let's open it up to the floor. Now, certainly, what we would like to, and some feedback that I'd love to get from the people on the meeting is we're finding it quite interesting at the moment. Is that, for example, in the CDMP, lots of people will go and do the fundamentals, but then will not progress to do the data quality. And they won't do anything else but the fundamentals. And I always find that being a specialist, you have to get down to knowing your area as well as possible. And there's always the great thing about certification like ISO is the recognition. Not saying that you're the expert, not saying that you can do it, but it is saying that you've gained a few things on the way and you paid attention to your learning and understanding. And would really love to see how people respond to that. How many of you would consider doing an ISO DQ certification, or CDMP specialist. So let me stop talking on there and see what's the view. What's the view of the people in the community? So Evelyn said, is this the data quality subject test? I'm a little bit unclear. I'm definitely interested in this. All right. So Thomas is 50-50. So I think Evelyn's asking, yeah, so this is, Evelyn, this is an ISO data quality certification, not a CDMP or
Not
DAMA
DAMA.
one. This is ISO. Okay. Now, what I'd like to suggest in terms of building people's career path is get your CDMP ones done and then go and look at the industry certification that makes the best, it gives you the best bang for buck. That's sort of what David is talking about here in terms of when you're in devices and they very focused on ISO quality and control and stuff like that, then ISOs are a good one. But okay, so most of them are saying 50-50. They're not sure. I'd love to hear, Amma, if you wouldn't mind, when you say 50-50, does it mean you don't see the value of it? Or does it mean you're not sure why you should do it?
You mean stopping at the CDMP fundamentals? Why you should go to the other exams? Is that what you mean?
No, so Amma, he's come back in terms of asking why, whether they should do it, and he said he's 50-50 on it.
Okay.
So I just love to understand, why is it 50-50? Why isn't it an important thing to do for you and your career? Not getting a response.
I'd like to chime in, if you don't mind, on the
Sure.
question you asked about the CDMP. So I'll admit I just did the fundamentals as well. That's the only one I did, right? To my defense, my excuse is that I did a CDMP, I think, in 2020, and then in 2022 I decided to do my PhD in information quality.
Right.
So I'm not saying that it's better or worse, but it's a different level, a different thing. I just have too much on between working and doing my PhD. I just don't have time for other sets of exams, but maybe eventually.
Right. And so Thomas asked a question, and David, maybe you could answer that, is can you clarify why it is better or worse to start with ISO or with CDMP?
I think the CDMP is much more comprehensive, right? It's goes into, if you think of the DAMA wheel, you probably have it on your wall there.
Yeah.
If you think of the DAMA wheel and it has the different sections, data quality is only one of those slices of the pie, right? So this is very focused. Whereas if you're starting off, I would say, to get a more comprehensive picture, the eye opener for me with CDMP was that there were certain sections like data modeling where I hated. I went in thinking, God, I just can't do that stuff. I don't know anything about it, but I learned something about it, whereas I was stronger in other areas. Whereas this data quality thing is quite specific to this topic, as opposed to being comprehensive.
Right. And maybe just from my view, in terms of that, is I do like to get the CDMP done, because that gives me what lots of people refer to as almost the generic or principle-based understanding on managing data. And then you'll find that other certifications give you a more focused understanding. Now, I was actually looking for somebody about something called PPDM, which is the Petroleum Professional Data Managers. And their exams are just about petroleum data and how do you handle the petroleum data. So you sort of want to get past the general and then specialize depending on your company, where you're at, where do you feel you can obtain the things. What's your feeling, David?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I actually did do another certification. I did after CDMP, I did something called I think it's less known, but EDMA, Enterprise Data Management Associate, which is from CMMI. So it's the people that it's from Carnegie Mellon, or the people that took over after Carnegie Mellon, the private background for that. And what it does is it teaches you specifically how to run a data maturity assessment in the company. And it tells you, gives you all the questions that you need to ask to say what level you're at. So that's the specialism I did, but I only did it after CDMP. I did CDMP first to get the basis level. So I think you're fair enough to say that if you can get the basis level, just gives you a better appreciation for other people's jobs as well, I think, when you do the basis level.
Yeah. So there's quite a few questions that have come up. So David, there's also they asked for other specialized certifications. So I do know of there's a certification from DGI or DGIQ has a DQ certification, if I'm correct.
Could be. I haven't really looked into them.
Yeah.
I actually follow very often Danette McGilvray. She has a great book about the, and I actually follow that as if it was a certification. I wish she would do a certification. She does a training, but not a certification.
Yeah,
because she could actually set up an institute. That's probably my favorite book in data quality, actually.
The 10 steps.
Yes, it's very good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was another question that we wanted to talk about was, I think what's very helpful looking at the ISO is basically bringing an implementation framework into your organization. So how do we run data quality in an organization? Whereas the DMBOK sort of talks about PDCA, but it doesn't go into the detail that certainly that ISO implementation framework goes into dealing with external parties, for example, your data architect and your data security and things like that. And those data resourcing that ISO tackles as well. So implementation framework is certainly almost another level of what and how that you get out of doing these certifications.
Yeah, I think it helps you not to forget certain things, right? On the other hand, I'd say the worst thing you can do is be too rigorous, right?
Yeah.
In data governance, doesn't go anywhere if people are completely rigorous down to the T, right? You need some flexibility to kind of make it your own as well, based on the culture of the organization and things like that. Otherwise, you're going to fail as well. But I do like the fact that it kind of is it helps you not to forget certain things that maybe you'd overlook.
Right. And then there's a question from Safiso. If you're working in an environment where DQ is the majority of your job, is this then a good start rather than starting with CDMP and getting the comprehensive view?
I'd say two answers to that. One, I'm a very big fan of like we talked about, the supplier customer model of data, right? To know how the data you created, where it's being used. And I also am a big fan of working internationally with different people from different cultures. In the same way in an organization, when you have this classic thing, IT versus the business, I think it's very important that the IT understand the business understand the IT. And this is where the CDMP can be valuable. However, if your organization is already very highly ISO focused, right, then I think it's a really good segue into that. I think you should be able to get support to start doing something, right? Whereas, maybe if you brought in, even Danette McGilvray's thing, if you brought in, someone could say, oh, well, that's just some consultant's opinion. Whereas the ISO standards are to have some weight to them, I would say.
Yeah. So Safiso, what I can also add there is DQ. Interestingly about DQ is that it's one thing finding that the data quality is not good enough. It's then going into root cause and remediation, and then you're going to jump around all over the DMBOK. You say, well, oh shucks, maybe I should have a master data management system or reference data, or my data modeling is doesn't have the right level of controls. That's why I'm getting into some of the challenges. So you will find that having that understanding or taking the DQ one step further and maybe not just throwing it over the wall and saying, well, I found the problem, now you go and fix it. I feel that it's very helpful to understand why there's a problem and how people can resolve the problem. What's your thinking on that, David?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, and the more you can kind of get your thought process around, like you think about the pie, right, the wheel, and that was the big thing I got out of it. Like I was blind to some areas of like data modeling or that, and then I got a new appreciation for why that's needed, or why I don't need to know it all myself, but I need to know the guy that can do that. Right? And I need to know how to talk to him or her in the language that they understand, right?
Okay, so then there's a question from Bilash, and I gave an answer, but I'd love to hear your view, David. It says, what is the organization who could certify as to whether ISO or the DAMA approach for DQ is right? Now, I mean, we in South Africa, we have what's called SANS, which is the South African National Standards Body, and they are the ones that ensure that any standard related to whatever we're doing is applied by organizations. So as an example, I can't claim that I'm ignorant and I didn't know that there was a data quality standard. That's a good example. Once it's been accepted by a country, you have an obligation to live up to the appropriate standards. And certainly within countries, the ISO standard is the right approach. That's what the national standards body typically would go after, is the ISO standard. David, what's your...
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been too involved in the audits yet, because like I said, I've only done the training myself in January, so give me a chance. But what I will say is that the ECCMA, like if you go to their website, you'll see that they do offer that exact thing. They have experts who are qualified to go out and externally validate that in fact you have implemented the ISO 8000 standard.
Yeah.
And they will literally ask you for evidence. They'll say, okay, show me your data governance policy. Show me evidence that you are receiving data quality issues from users, and that you have a mechanism for not just fixing them, but fixing root causes. The very important point, that you have a continuous improvement process. And if you can't prove it, or show me your roles and descriptions, your job description.
Right.
Show me where it says there's a person that's a data administrator or data quality or whatever. And if you can't do it, then you don't get certified, or you don't get that level of maturity identified, right?
Yeah.
So they're the only people I know. I'm sure there are others that do it, but
yeah, I do know in South Africa there's a national standards body for any form of manufacturing, imports, exports, things like that, and they will vet the products coming in and out, and part of it's where's your quality, where's your definition, and they would default into an ISO standard.
Yeah.
It just, it's more universal. Okay.
I mean, even in the US, there's ANSI, ANSI, the American National Standards. I've seen that a lot.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, I've only really worked in major multinational companies, and they've usually settled on ISO instead of even if they were American headquartered, they'd still use ISO. Thankfully.
And then I think there's one in Britain. I think that's BCI, which is...
Oh, probably, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one other question. AJ asked, could you please answer how a data contract helps in DQ? What will a data contract speed up? Will data contract speed up ISO implementation? AJ, just to confirm, is that the definition that David had on his screen about a data contract?
No, I don't think it was about data contract. Let me see.
Data specification, I think it was.
Yeah, that'd be something
AJ,
different.
could you just confirm what you mean by a data contract?
I have heard that term recently.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So data contract is kind of an agreement between two business units. You can say the data producer and the data consumer. So let's
Right.
say one business unit is producing the data and another is using the data. So if there is kind of agreement between the two business units for the data, how it
So
is going
it's
to
like a
be?
data sharing agreement.
It's a sharing, but with some SLAs, some
Right.
SLOs, and some
Yeah. Yeah.
pre-agreement things like how the data is going to be consumed, what data
Yeah.
is going to be consumed, and defining the ownership and accountability at the producer sides, so that consumer can directly talk about if there is
So
any issue to the data owner, something like that.
So it's a very interesting thing you bring up, right? Because I think that term data contracts is crept in the last 2 years. It's kind of like an in vogue term, I would say, and it does describe it pretty well. So they do go into that in the ISO standards, but they don't call it that, right? They call it
Yeah.
by other names. Like they say that you must have a specification and you must guarantee levels that it will be that, and there can be consequences if it's not that, right? Therefore you may have to, I don't know, even potentially pay fees to companies if you're not producing the data correctly, or remedy fees and things like that. So they don't actually use the word contracts, but I think it's very the same. It's just that the data contracts term has come into vogue in the last couple of years. Maybe the ISO standards need to be updated to reflect that terminology, but it does include that. 100% sure it does go into that topic.
And AJ, I think something that we miss in those data sharing agreements or data processing agreements, especially with external parties, is a data quality specification or expectation of the data. So
What
that,
does good look like?
yeah. So I think it's critical that you include those in there. So it should speed up that implementation, and it should also prevent rubbish coming into your system. You should actually turn it around and send it back before you ingest it, and then the problem becomes yours.
Yeah, good point. It's a great point to bring up, though.
Thanks for validation. Thank you.
Pleasure, AJ. Any other questions? I think there were quite a few. I seem to have lost track of all the different questions coming at me.
Are you surprised that ISO could possibly have so many people asking questions?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's DQ. I think there's so many people working in that area, and just mastering that topic and becoming a specialist. I think there's a lot to it. Sofiso, just to check from your side, are you comfortable with the answers we gave?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much.
Anything else?
Welcome.
Any other question you'd like to share with us? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
No, that was my main concern.
okay.
Well, not concern per se. Yeah, but that was basically I was just wondering that if I work particularly in a DQ environment, but then when you explained how the overall doing the CDMP and the
Yeah.
getting the overall, it made sense to me then, that because I thought, oh, okay, if this is particularly looking at DQ, then maybe I don't need to do the CDMP. But you gave me an explanation as to why that would be beneficial for me.
Fantastic. And it's certainly a nice exercise. And what I can suggest to some people is, for example, take data governance out of the middle of the wheel and put data quality in there, and then see the impact that it has, or its associations with all of the other knowledge areas. And the DMBOK R2 has actually gone into that quite a bit more detail in terms of how does DQ interact and interface with other areas. So
That's something I have to listen to, actually, Howard. Can you send me the link on that?
yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, if you do, yeah, thanks.
I'll certainly do that.
Catch up on that.
So then there's a question, maybe you, David, could help. A question on, do you have any specific names of organizations that are ISO 8000 compliant?
No, like I said, I only did the training in January, and I have some interest. One of my clients, they're kind of interested in doing it. I've done some proposals for it, but I think ECCMA, the organization they're doing this, I don't think they'd be afraid to say, I mean, this is their bread and butter. They go out and they certify people. So I think if you, especially if you were interested in doing paid training with them, and I'm sure they'd have to give you some examples of companies. It'd actually be nice. I wonder if they put it on their website, and maybe worth to have a look around their website if they have any logos up or anything like that.
And there's another question from AJ, in terms of is there a different subset of 8000 for financials? Now that sort of comes back to my question, is it's for master data, and there's a lot of financial general ledger and stuff that goes into master data, but probably not on the transaction side, right? So that master data element would talk about any master data domain, or is it specific to products?
No, it does talk generally applicable, but then they have a very specific, weirdly enough, about what they call industrial data,
Right.
which I thought first of all was like master data for product setup stuff where you make stuff and ship stuff, but it actually goes into more details than that. It's like machine data and stuff like that.
Yes.
Whereas, so I think, and maybe you should say that sometimes the standards reflect the writer's interests.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To an extent, they try to be impartial in general, but then they have a slant towards a particular industry, potentially. Often that's aerospace industries or things like that, is what I've seen,
Yeah, there's actually someone that I know very well who's on the ISO 8000 technical committee, and he works for a company called Pylog. I don't know if you've ever heard of Pylog.
Oh yeah, massive MDM company, right?
That's it. And they've got a whole organization that brings product data and codes and stuff like that together. So yeah, he was basically he was the founder of Pylog, and he's also one of the lead members on the technical committee for the ISO 8000.
And it's definitely still active, I would say, because what I learned
Yes.
that there's 23 standards, but they actually have 6 others that they're writing. I didn't mention them in the presentation, but because they're not the turkey isn't cooked, so to speak, but there's 6 other ones in the series that are still being written, right? So there seems to be more coming.
Yeah. Emma asked the question, is ISO standard applicable for IoT systems?
Internet of Things.
That would be something like some of the sensors on medical devices. You may know some of that.
Yeah. That may be when they. I can't really give a good answer on that, but I think that maybe when they're talking about. Sorry, there's one of the standards. Let me just see. One of them is called.
Because if allow me, I'll elaborate on that, because in our organization, we already have a framework for the data quality and we do some standardization. But what we're facing now, most of the application reading the data from IoT, and most of now the device edge have compute edge direct. So how can I need to validate it and do some standard for this data?
So what I would say that from what I've seen of this, there's more of a slant on data for, I would say, ERP systems for using data in manufacturing, in purchasing, in selling, in marketing, standard business process. I haven't seen much, at least not in these standards, that talks about Internet of Things data and like the device data, like you talk about. There possibly are other standards, but I haven't seen much of it in this.
And I think what a lot of them do, Emma, is that they look at data exchange standards that have namespaces and taxonomies that ensure that when data is communicated from these devices, there's a well-defined specification that controls how the data is communicated. So I certainly see that in the oil and gas, where they're getting sensor data from wherever, that's all got to be well defined and agreed in terms of the overall data model. But that data exchange specifications are very helpful in controlling that.
Yeah, it's actually something I'd like to the whole thing which you mentioned a few minutes ago, data crunch. I'd love to implement something like that. A lot of the stuff I've done in the past has been a bit more laissez-faire, a bit more kind of principles based.
Right.
Than being, that's and then kind of encouraging people to do better when they failed. Whereas the data contracts approach, it seems to be more like, there will be penalties when you don't do it, right?
Yeah, and your SLAs as well. So especially when you basically sharing data with ESBs, or in Saudi they call it a GSB, then you need to be able to turn that around and respond to that pretty quickly. Fantastic. We are 25 minutes past. David, just a quick check. Is there any last question before we drop off? But no. Okay. David, thank you so much for everything you've done. Anyone who'd like to contact David, we will provide a PDF of his notes. You can contact him then. And we'll also, as we release the recording, you'll get all the information, and then you'll be able to connect to David then. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, David.
Bye now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.